Bruchim Aboim. I'm back again, filling in for Rabbi Yusewitz. We are holding Perek Yud Aleph. Tefilla Perek Yud Aleph in Sefer Ahava. If you're following along and you need a Sefer Ahava, Hilchos Tefilla Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Kol Makom sheyesh bo Yasar miYisrael. Any place that has 10 Yidden residing, tzarich lahachin by bayis. It is necessary, it is obligatory to prepare a house. A house could also mean a room or a structure. So that these 10 Yidden can gather in order to daven at all the times when Tefillah is necessary, when it's time to daven. This place is called the Beis HaKnesses, the place where we gather. Knesses means to gather in, to cluster, to huddle, to get together. And even though generally speaking we are not coercive, there's no kfiyat datit. There is kfiyat datit actually in Yiddishkeit, but this is one of the areas where we have this kfiyah. We force each other. Let's say there's 10 Yidden there, and 9 of them are excited about building a shul, and the 10th guy says, we don't need it, we can daven in the field. The other 9 are able to force this 10th one to build, to sponsor, to invest in building the Beis HaKnesses, and to buy a Sefer Torah, as well as a Nevi'im and Ksuvim, which were also written on parchment and a scroll in those days, but presumably were not bound together with the Torah here being for Kriyas Torah. Halacha Beis, Kishabayim Beis HaKnesses. Now that we have the funds, the 10 Yidden got together, they had a fundraising campaign, a building campaign, they got the money together. How do they build the shul? Says the Rambam, Kishabayim Beis HaKnesses, when we build a shul, Ein Bayinin Ma'isei Ela Begav Hashel Ir. We build it nowhere but in the height, in the highest part of the city. Shenemer b'reish ha'miyos tikra. We see from the pasuk that we want to call out from the high places. Not only do we want the topology, the contours of the land, we want to get it on the hill on the top of the place. We also want the walls and the turrets and the roof of the shul, the yamuke, the big. If that's the architecture, you want the shul to be prominent and prestigious everywhere. It's higher than any of the other structures in the city. It's basically when Ezra talks about building the Beis Hamikdash, he uses the word l'reimim to lift it up, to bring it up, to make it high. And when we plan the openings for our shul, the opening should be in the Mizrach. Shenemar b'achrinim lifnei hamishkan kedma, that we camp in front of the Mishkan kedma. Now in the shul, we build a aron where the Sefer Torah can reside, can be placed. So we're supposed to put the aron on the wall towards which we face when we daven. So we want everyone to face the Aron Kodesh when we daven. And as we will learn, I'm not sure if it's in this Perek, but obviously we face the face Yisrael, we face Yerushalayim, we face the Beis Hamikdash when we daven. So in our lands, we end up facing east. So we said before the doors have to be the east. Obviously, we can't fulfill that if we also have the Aron Kodesh in the east. So we put the Aron Kodesh in the east, and usually the doors are somewhere else. But we want the Aron to be the Aron Kodesh to be in the front of the shul. We place a bima in the center of shul, and actually this became a point of contention in relatively recent years. In the first half of the 20th century, when the conservative and reform movements were trying to co-opt and hijack Yiddishkeit, and they modeled their shul after Goyish houses of worship, Lahavdol, Favavdos, and Ketz, and they put their bim in the front of shul, and that was obviously not in line with what it says here. The bim was in the middle of shul, and because we from Yidden were very much opposed to and antagonistic to these new religions, it became a very strong point. Even though the way that Rambam writes it here, it's not so. It's not such a Yaharik Val Yaver. It's not one of these three mitzvahs that you die for. It's just a technical thing, as the Rambam will say in the rest of the halacha. That it's a logistical, technical thing. But it became a thing where till today people will they don't want to go to a shul. Also, if the chazan is in the middle of the shul or if the bim is in front of the shul, it's not. I hope I'm not confusing that. Maybe I'm confusing that with the bim, with the chazan being in the middle of the shul. Anyway, okay. Either way, let's learn the Rambam. We place the bima in middle of the shul, so that the ka'ila could be the oila, the one who's reading the Torah, can stand in the middle of shul, or the one who is speaking words of rebuke and inspiration, encouragement to the community to improve their ways. Because we want them to be in the center of shul so that everybody can hear equally. In those days, they had besides for the Arden, they had a separate box or a separate mini Arden that they had a Sefer Torah there that was closer a little bit to the bima for when they were laning, or for people that wanted to use the Sefer Torah actually to read from, to learn from for Shnai Mikra. So they had an extra box that they kept the Sefer Torah in, and they would keep that near the bima. I think I actually was confusing the bima in the middle with the chazan stender in the middle. They made sure not to have the chazan stender in the middle, and I'm sorry for confusing myself and everybody else. Halacha daled. Ketzad ha'am yeshvim b'batei yisiyos. How do we sit? How do we set up the seating in the shul? Hazkenim yeshvim upneim klapi ha'am achireihem klapi ha'heichel. The elders, the people who everyone has to look up to and learn from, would sit in the front row, right in front of the shul, so everyone could see them, and they would sit with their facing away from the art and facing towards the community, sort of how by the Fabrengen you had the people behind the Rebbe, the elders would sit with their facing everybody. And the rest of the community would sit in front, from one row past the kingdom all the way to the back of shul. They have shura lifnei shura, or one row after the other. So the Rambam is describing a shul with rows of benches, not with a table where you're sitting front to front, and then the next one is front to front. Here you had front to back, like a stadium, I guess, or some anywhere where you have rows of benches without a table, without people alternating orientation. In this way, everybody, the whole community, other than the Zkenim, is facing the Kodesh, the Arden, and they're facing the Zkenim, and they're facing Klapi HaTeva, they're facing the Chazan, and they're facing the Bima. And the Shliach Tzibur, the Chazan, the Baal Tefilla, stands in front of the teva, in front of the bestender. And he faces, like everybody else, towards when our community is Mizrach, or towards in other communities wherever wall the Aron Kodesh is, the Chazan stands and faces the front, facing front. But halacha hey, how do we treat a shul? Shul and the base medrash, which we haven't discussed yet, but is a place which is a place of learning, a study hall. So these place of gathering for davening, a place of gathering for Torah, must be treated with great respect. And we sweep them out, and we keep them clean. We mop them. Menachem call Yisrael b'sor l'mayda v'shina b'eretz hatzvi l'hadlik ashashi is about the Knesiyas, and the Rambam speaking from experience of the local customs of the Yidden in Spain and in the West, and in Shinar, which is Bavel, and Eretz Hatzvi, which is Eretz Yisrael. Those lands, the minig is l'hadlik ashashi is about the Knesiyas, to light glass lamps. I think Ashash is glass. So the point here is lights. They would make it light and shul, latzia bakarkom machzalois, and to place mats on the floor. In our times, we obviously sit on chairs. In those days, they would sit on thin mats in the eastern cities, eastern lands. The Rambam was aware of our minig in the Roman world, the Western world, what they call today. There they sit in shul and in Beis Medrash on chairs. So we spoke before about the physical kavod that we have to show in cleaning it and sweeping it and mopping it and in keeping it light and all that. Now we talk about the behavioral rules in the shul and in Beis Medrash. We do not act in a light-hearted and unserious manner. Joking or mocking or even idle chatter, meaning words that have no substance or no purpose, just gossip and that kind of thing, you are not allowed to engage in when you're sitting in a shul Beis Medrash. And we do not eat in a shul. We do not drink in a shul. These are halachas that we'll see in the end over here that about eating and drinking. Give it a second. We do not beautify ourselves. In other words, we don't take the time to focus on ourselves. We don't engage in recreation in a shul. We don't even use a shul for shelter, not in the hot day or a hot muggy summer day because of the hot heat, and not when it's raining to get out of the rain. The shul should be exclusively for purposes of Torah, Tefilla, connected to the Eibishter. Out of necessity, where there is a necessity, Chachamim, those who are sitting and teaching or those who are sitting and learning, are permitted to eat and drink. Out of necessity, and we do eat and drink in shuls. But this is a Tanai that is we're mindful of, and we make this condition when we designate a shul, because that's part of our darkei hachsidus and darkei Yiddishkeit is to make a kiddush and to bring, and eat to drink when necessary, to eat when necessary, to not to connect to each other, not to disrupt from our learning, and so it is permitted by special dispensation. Anyway, halacha zayin ve'ein machashvim bahem cheshbeinos. We do not engage in our own analysis and calculations in shul. Unless these calculations were necessary for a mitzvah. If you were a gabbai tzedakah, you were the treasurer of the shul, and you had to make calculations of upkeep of the shul and so on, you will be allowed to do that in shul. For example, if you're running a fundraiser, or you're collecting between the community for a purpose like the Yusewitz Getzel, so you would be allowed in that case to do the accounting in shul. We do not use it as an auditorium to eulogize and speak and describe and mourn passing, unless it is a passing of a communal figure, of a spiritual leader, someone for whom this is not just a private expression of grief, but a communal necessity, an obligation and benefit and merit to be maspid, to eulogize this person. For example, when you need to eulogize the great sages of the city, who are who gather the people are gathering for their purpose for them to hear their hesped, or maybe b'chayehim they gather to hear their Torah. There are people that are worthy of for whom this eulogy is actually a communal exercise and not a personal expression of grief. Halacha ches. In the event where a shul or a beis medrash has multiple entrances, obviously entrances on different sides of the shul, not one next to each other, like 770, for example, has many doors next to each other. There would be no benefit from going in one and out the other. But if you're going out into 770, there's also a door on the other side that goes to the courtyard where the tashlach is. And so if you might think to make a shortcut, lo yasa kapandaria, you should not make the shul into a shortcut. In other words, entering the one door and exiting the other door in order to save yourself some steps of going around. This is in keeping with the various details of the halachas in the previous halachas, that the shul is supposed to be exclusively for the Eibishter, for connecting to the Eibishter, and should not be using a shul for anything that's not a mitzvah. Halacha tes. If you do find that you have a need to go into shul for something that's not a mitzvah, for example, your nachasol, your nachas son is sitting in shul learning Torah, and it's time for supper or time for bed, and he has to come home. You have to call him, or if your friend is busy learning and you need him for something. So you can't go in to get him because that's not a mitzvah. So what do? So Rambam, you're allowed to go into shul, but you should use the opportunity to do a mitzvah. You see, you'll read a pasuk from Chumash, or Yemer Shmua, or Chazer, a detail from Teresh Bal a statement or a member from Teresh Bal and then you go on to call your friend. So this way, even though there is an aspect to your entry that was personal, it should not be the only reason you entered in the shul. If a person needs to call his son and he has no Teresh Bal Peh, he doesn't know how to read, and he doesn't have any Teresh Bal Peh memorized that he can mention. So what does he do? So he should say to one of the children that are sitting in shul, please read for me the pasuk that you are learning. Or even if in such a shul where there happens to be no one available to chazer a Torah for you, or they're busy learning and you don't want to interrupt them, let's say, the teacher's going to get angry at you. So what should you do? So the Rambam gives a different aid. So you could sit for a few moments in the shul, even quietly, even not learning a Torah, and then you would be covering your bases, covering your obligation to only go in for holy things. Why? He's sitting in shul, even without learning, is itself part of engaging in a mitzvah. As we know from what we would say every day 3 times, that those who sit in your house are lucky. Why are they lucky? Because sitting in your house, sitting in neighbor's house, neighbor's shul, is itself a mitzvah. Halacha Yud, a person who went into shul for the standard reasons, to daven, to learn. So do we obligate him to not benefit from the shortcut, right? If he went in one side and he really has to go out the other side, but he's worried that constitutes a shortcut. If he came in for other reasons and now he wants to take another leave instead of going the long way, that's fine. If a person needs to, for whatever reason, the halachas, even though in a Beis Hamikdash has a stricter laws of respect and it is prohibited to go in with your walking stick or wearing your shoes or travel gear or with dusty feet. None of these restrictions apply to a shul, and it is permitted to go into shul with those things. And if a person finds that he has excess saliva that he has to get rid of, it is permitted. Is permitted for him to spit in shul. Of course, it's necessary to cover the spit so you're not causing other people to become disgusted, as we do when we say in Alim l'shabeach. Lach Yud Aleph. What do we do? What is the proper protocol, proper behavior with regards to a shul or a beis medrash which has fallen into ruin? It's no longer used. It is a unsafe structure, or it's not used anymore. The Rambam tells us they are still considered holy and sacred ground, and we have to treat them with the due respect. I will destroy your sanctuaries, your holy places. From this pasuk, the Rambam is quoting the Gemara, but we learn from this pasuk that even though it's even though they are destroyed, they're still referred to as sanctuaries. They're still referred to as holy places because they are still considered holy. Just as one is obligated to show respect to the place, honor the place when they are settled, when they're used in use. So too, when they fall into ruin or desolation, they're empty. We still must treat them with honor and respect, with the exception of sweeping and mopping, which we are not obligated to do in the ruins of a shul. We are not required to do that. If weeds begin to grow in the cracks between the tiles of an abandoned shul, so on one hand, you don't want to leave it because it's disrespectful. On the other hand, if you keep it too clean, you lose out on a different benefit. People will see the state of disrepair and the state of desolation in this old shul. They might be motivated to fix it. So what do? We uproot the weeds so they shouldn't grow. But we leave them where they grew. By leaving these weeds where they grew, they're not going to grow and can cause further damage or overgrown appearance to the shul. But by leaving them where they are, we are still allowing for some motivation, maybe shocking people out of their complacency and not building the shul, and they will come to build the shul. I would be remiss if I would not mention, because this is Rabbi Yusewitz's shir, that Rabbi Yusewitz is the Menachem of a wonderful place of Menachem, and they are engaged in a fundraising campaign right now to build not a shul, but a beis medrash, you could say, or a beis hasefer, which is like a beis medrash for children. Menachem is a wonderful place, a wonderful school, and you could find the information online without trying too hard, I'm sure. So if you benefit from Rabbi Yusewitz's generosity in sharing his time and his wisdom with us, help him share that wisdom and that educational zeal with his students, as he does by helping them buy another plot, another building to expand their school and expand the number of students who benefit from Rabbi Yusewitz, as you do, as I do, as we all do. So that's my plug for the building campaign. Menachem, Crown Heights, it's a charity campaign. Find it and send a lot of money. Link in the description. We do not, speaking of building campaigns, let's say you had a building campaign because your shul is falling into disrepair, it's too small, you want it to be bigger. So you might say, okay, let's knock it down and rebuild it. Says the Rambam, says halacha, no, we do not destroy Beis Knesset in order to build another one after the destruction of the old one, or to, let's say, sell the land in order to get money to build somewhere else. What do? First we build the second one, and then we destroy the first one, or get rid of it somehow. Because we're worried, as happens with contractors, unfortunately, things can happen and the construction can stall. You don't want it to be in a situation where you destroy the first one and then you're not successful building the second one. Now you're left you don't have the first one, you don't have the second one. So what you do is you build the second one first and then you can get rid of the first one. Even if you are only rebuilding a single wall, you build the new wall, and only then do you break and remove the old wall. When is this the case? When the structure is still sound and you are destroying and rebuilding for other reasons. However, when the foundations, the footings are still healthy and secure, and the walls are not falling, are not leaning and falling. If the shul becomes structurally unsound and it becomes necessary you can't use the shul in the interim because it's not safe to use, So what do you do? Then you're allowed to destroy, dismantle, deconstruct the old shul immediately. Is made it, but you have to start the building project quickly. And you don't stop there. Night to avoid this possibility where the building stalls. So you have a sense of urgency, and you work day and night to make sure that the shul is replaced properly and we're not left stuck without a shul. Okay, you're allowed to elevate and promote a Beis HaKnesses, a place which is a gathering place for davening, and turn it into a Beis HaMedrash, a place where it's a gathering place for learning. Beis HaMedrash, a place which is designated for learning, also Beis HaKnesses, is prohibited to make it an exclusively a place for davening. Now we davening where we learn. But if you wanted to take a shul and say from now on no more shiurim, we're only going to daven here, that would be prohibited. You say the sanctity of the Beis HaMedrash is higher than that of Beis HaKnesses, so we can promote the building, but we cannot demote it from a Beis HaMedrash to Beis HaKnesses. We elevate things when it comes to holiness. We do not diminish their holiness. And now the Rambam is going to list a hierarchy of increasing sanctity and what you're allowed to use, what you can exchange for another thing. So, if the people together agree to sell their Beis HaKnesses, they are allowed to use the funds to buy teva. This is the standard, the box for the Sefer Torah. If they sold the box of the Sefer Torah, it is permitted to use that money, as considered an upgrade, to spend that money on the farhang or on the mantle of the Sefer Torah, the mantle. If they sold that mantle, that money can be used. It's considered elevated by using it to buy chomashim, which is to say the Torah, but not in the form of a kedusha sefer Torah, just with it has the words of the Torah without the kedusha sefer Torah. If they sold this chomashim, meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be a bound chomash, it could be a scroll chomash, but it's not kedusha sefer Torah. If they sold these chomashim, these non-kedusha sefer Torah chomashim, you're allowed to elevate those funds and purchase a sefer Torah, which is written with kedusha sefer Torah. But demoting on those same categories the other around would be prohibited. If you sold a sefer Torah, in other words, you can't buy any of those lower categories. Cannot be. You can't use the funds that you got from selling the sefer Torah. You can only use it for another sefer Torah. Because there is no higher kedusha than the kedusha of sefer Torah. So since you can only spend money from one thing for something that's higher than it, you can only use a Torah, money from a Torah, for another Torah. I think we'll get to it here in the Pnim, that actually one exception to that is Pidyon Shvuyim, I believe. We'll see. And in the Chem Meisayim, this didn't also apply to leftover money. That is to say, if you sold chomashim to buy new chomashim, and then you bought all the new chomashim that you needed, and you have money left over, so you would think you can buy something of a lesser kedusha. The answer is no. You can only use it for equal or greater kedusha. Halacha desvav v'chein im gavhu ha'am ma'is l'bnis Beis HaMedrash. Now we talk about a similar halacha, applying not to money that was obtained through selling something holy, but money that was just fundraised. But it was fundraised for a specific purpose. So if you raise the funds to build a Beis HaMedrash or Beis HaKnesses, or for a Beis HaKnesses, or to build this box for the Torah, and Brichas or to buy the fabric material of curtains or the cover for the Sefer Torah, or Sefer Torah, or they collect money for Sefer Torah, and they want to use the funds for something other than what they collected it for. So in the event that is permitted, under the circumstances where that is permitted, it is still only permitted if the kedusha of the substitution is something that's equal or greater than the kedusha of the initial purpose. So in this way, with this halacha is different than the halacha immediately preceding it. The halacha Yadal said that the change, any money left over, still has to be used for equal or greater kedusha. But that's only because the money came from selling something holy, so the kedusha was already on the money. But if you collected money for a Torah, let's say just like the money in the Mishkan, in the desert, they collected money for the Mishkan and they felt finished. They had enough for the Mishkan. So what did they do with the change? So you would think that the kedusha of the Mishkan applies and it rests on all the money, even the change. And the answer is no. If the money came from donors, once you've fully funded whatever it is you set out to fund, the additional money is not limited to something of equal or greater kedusha and can be used for a lesser kedusha. Any accessories, any things that are used, the furniture or other aspects of the shul of the Beis HaKnesses have the same status of kedusha as the Beis HaKnesses. A curtain that's used not for a Sefer Torah but for a I guess for any svarim, so the Perek that's used has an equivalent kedusha as the svarim which are on the in that article. And if there was a condition applied, for example, if they made a Perek for Sefer Torah, but they made it conditional that if they needed to use it for mechitza, they could use it for mechitza. So then that tonight does help in limiting or eliminating, I should say, the restriction that you have to use it only for that purpose. So in halacha Yudalid, we just snuck by this idea that the people of the city came together and agreed to sell their shul. And now the Rambam pumps the brake and says, hang on a second. When we said before that you're allowed to sell a shul, that's not a blanket permission. When are you allowed to sell a shul? The Beis HaKnesses. The Beis HaKnesses shall kafarim only in a small village. And the definition of a village is defined elsewhere. Point is, it's not a hub. It's not a place where people from other cities come and use the shul. So in such a shul where it's basically used by the inhabitants, so there's a way, and this still needs to be done correctly, but it can be done. That the shul in a village where, in other words, they don't have tourist industry, they don't have business conventions, they don't have people from other cities coming to visit. So when they designated the shul, it was for their own use, and therefore, if they all together or whatever method they used to determine the consensus, they can come to a consensus that they want to sell the shul, mutarim, because they are permitted to do so because it's their shul for their use, and they've decided to sell it, so they're entitled to make that decision. A shul of a metropolis, of a larger city, a city where there are visitors that use it, people that come from elsewhere and they end up using the shul. So when we designated a shul, when we zoned this building as a shul, we meant that not only the locals can use it, everyone can use it. In other words, every yid, wherever he is, has a right to use it. In other words, he has some sort of balabadishkeit. If someone will try to lock the door when he's there, he's entitled to say, "Excuse me, this is a shul. It's the belonging of the entire Jewish nation, and I'm entitled to come in." If that's the case, how would you sell it without his permission? Since it was made for his purpose, you obviously probably call a bell that anyone that comes to the city can use the shul. It's expected, and it's sort of baked into the arrangement. Not the shul called Yisrael. The shul now belongs to the entire nation. And it is prohibited, even if with the agreement and consensus of all the inhabitants of the city, it is prohibited to sell it. They have no right to sell something that's not exclusively theirs. So, since we've now established that it is permitted with consensus to sell a holy item that belongs to a kfar, that's not for use by all Yidden. So because the kfar are able to sell their shul, or if they want to build with the money that they get from the sale a new shul. Or if they want to use the sale, let's say they have two shuls and they have no table, no box for no order. So they want to sell one shul so that they can enhance the first shul. They say for Torah, they need to buy a sefer Torah. So they don't get a free pass to reallocate and rezone the shul to be anything. Under the obligation of showing honor and respect to a shul, they are obligated to make a condition on the buyer that he will not use it for a shameful or unpleasant use, like a bathhouse where people will be bathing in a state of undress, or a bursaki, a place where chemicals are used that make it very unpleasant to walk by. It's a tannery, a place where skins of animals are turned into leather. Not a ritual mikveh, not a bathhouse, right? We said bathhouse, now we're saying also a ritual, a religious bathhouse, and not a beis hamayim, a house of water, which can mean a laundromat or it could mean a public bathroom. And the point is that all these things are places where are not respectful and would not be right to repurpose a shul for those uses. However, because under the circumstances the sale is legitimate, and sometimes with these restrictions it might be a deal breaker. You won't be able to sell the shul, and you might need to sell the shul. So the halacha allows that if the 7 Tuvei Ha'ir, or the communal representatives, sort of the best of the mention, the community leadership, with the not in a backroom deal where nobody knows. Ha'ir means that it's an open door session. It's something that's publicized. So if they do so, they have the authority to override this restriction and stipulate that the buyer can use the shul for this purpose. So we said before that if you collected money, then the change can be used for anything. But if you sold a shul, for example, the change still retains its kedusha and has to be used only for something of equal or greater kedusha. So here, because we've mentioned this dispensation, this exception for the Tuvei Ha'ir, the communal representatives in a public arrangement can make certain exceptions. So this exception can be done here as well. That they can stipulate that we're going to sell the shul, we're going to use the money to build a new shul, and if there's any money extra, we're making it tonight that money should become chulin. That is binding, and the money is chulin. So when they get the money from the buyer, and they use it to buy another shul or any other legitimate purpose, like buying a teva or buying the mantle or the Brichas or buying a chumash or buying a sefer Torah, which all were acceptable uses of money from a sale of a shul. If they made that condition and they had money left over, that rest of the money becomes chulin, and they can use it for whatever purpose they want, presumably only communal purposes, obviously, but even mundane, building a water treatment plant or whatever. Likewise, if these communal representatives delegate their authority, if all of them or most of them designate one individual to act as their representative to make these decisions, that is a binding arrangement, and whatever that one representative does is binding and is acceptable. And he is able to sell or give on his own authority as he sees fit, and he can make whatever conditions he sees are fit and necessary. So we hinted at this in the previous halacha when we said and he's able to sell or give. So that's Rambam turns to that detail and says, you might think that you're only allowed, and this is true of certain kachim, I think all kachim even, things that have some sanctity cannot just be gifted out of hektish. They have to be exchanged for money. The kedusha has to go somewhere, and so the kedusha goes on money, and then the thing becomes released from the kedusha, and the kedusha stays on the money. That's not the case Here, even though we're talking about kedusha, the thing has kedusha, the money has kedusha if you sold it, but we do allow a shul to be transferred without actually transferring the kedusha to some money. As Allah Rambam says again, in starting from Halacha Chav, Kashem Shemot Lam Limkar, just as we are permitted to sell a shul, Kach Nisim Nisim Matana is permitted to give a shul as a gift. Right? You love the Ovid Neichlan of Shei, like we say, if there was no benefit to the community or to the individual, when a person gives a gift, it's an exchange for something. There's some benefit, there's some pleasure, there's some good that is coming the other direction that is motivating the gift that's going out. So that, even though it's an intangible benefit, sometimes that intangible benefit is enough of an exchange to allow, at least in this case, not in Kutchim, but in this case of selling a communal shul, that if the representative of the community ever determines that the benefit, or the goodwill that will be generated, whatever abstract benefit will be accrued by giving the shul, they're allowed to give the shul. Avo, so you might think, okay, so if you can give it as a gift, for sure you can rent it. No. Loy maskinim I say you are not allowed to rent the shul. The loy mashkinim I say we are not allowed to use the shul as collateral. Because it's still in its state of kedusha, right? You haven't sold it and removed the kedusha. So on one hand, you're still keeping it in kedusha, but you're also giving the keys to somebody who might not treat it right. So if you sold it and you removed the kedusha from it, so then if he doesn't treat it right, so that it's okay, it's not a shul anymore. But here, if you didn't, or he gifted it, you transferred it, now it's his. If you're renting it, or if you're giving it as collateral, there you're putting it in a situation where it might be disrespected, so you're not allowed to do that. Likewise, when there is a deconstruction project, the dismantling of a shul building, the structural components of the shul, that is to say the bricks, the beams, the earth that was part of the shul, you can sell them or trade them or gift them, again because you're transferring ownership and removing the kedusha in exchange for whatever it was you got back. To lend them is prohibited because the kedusha only rises off of departing from this structure or the components of it with money, like other hakesh, or uniquely here with a benefit that is considered to be as if financial. Finally, it was a long Perek. We come to halacha chavav, the last halacha of the Perek. Chayva shel ir, the plaza, the city plaza, the city square. Aval bisha amis palim by the tiny guys with mamadis. There are times when the shul is not large enough. The two cases that are identified here in the Rambam are a tinius, a public fast where men, women, and children gather to daven, and it is done. The Reish Chutzes is done in the plaza. There's a whole process. They take out the teva and they put ashes. It's a whole drama to get Hashem's mercy and compassion. But they're outside of shul. So the question that's implicit here: does any kedusha now attach to the plaza? Another case that the Rambam gives here is Ma'amades. There was a time where obviously Kohanim and Levim are represented in the Beis HaMikdash. Yisraelim were also represented in the Beis HaMikdash, and they would send designated representatives to there was a sort of a rotation, and they sent representatives Yisrael b'Ma'amadim. We mentioned it in davening, and those who stayed behind were still part of that group, but they were too many to actually all serve in the Beis HaMikdash, all stand in the Beis HaMikdash. So they would have special tefillas. I think they would read from the Torah. They would read from Brichas. They would add a whole say there, and I can't remember if they actually fasted. It was a whole process, a whole project, and because it was a gathering, a larger than usual gathering, so they would gather in the street. So does any kedusha attach to these places? Says Rambam, says Halacha, ein by kedusha. No. No kedusha attached to these plazas. These uses for holy purposes are temporary, and these places have not been designated for tefillah in a permanent way, and so no kedusha attaches to them. Likewise, homes or courtyards where occasionally, on occasion, as necessary, a minion you might chop a minion in the lobby. You might make a minion in your backyard when you're having your lag or a bonfire, whatever it is. There is no kedusha there because they were not established in any permanent way for tefillah. They were only used for tefillah in a temporary fashion, like a person might daven in his living room. Obviously, his living room does not become a beis hakneses, and learning at a dining room table does not make it a beis hamedrash, and no kedusha attaches to it in that way. However, this is a good time to encourage one and all. I won't encourage you to daven in your living room, but I want to encourage you to learn in your living room. Sit by your table and learn sometimes. Let your wife and children see that Bahem Nehegayim Valayla, you learn Torah at home, whether it's the Rambam share remotely with Rabbi Yusewitz or some other form of learning. We just learned today, according to the Rebbe Saydah, we learned with Ibn Torah, we learned to Maimer Asar Sheishvim, that there's a big mitzvah to learn together with a minyan. Sometimes that means in a public setting, in a shul. Sometimes that means learning with a minyan in your house and making a shir in your house. That'd be wonderful. And then you can really live and learn this halacha that we just did, that even though you're using every space that you have available for holy purposes, there's still something very special about a shul. And so we'll see you in shul. Thank you very much.